Welcome in to the Rock Talk Studio, the podcast that unlocks the greatest stories in rock and roll history through the books and the documentaries. I'm Big Rick, and I do the reading, I do the watching, and I gladly do all the digging to bring you nothing but the good stuff, like today's book that's all about bumping into the rock and roll geniuses. When I think of real big record label executives, names like Mo Ostin, Jerry Wexler, Clive Davis, Emmett Ertegun, David Geffen, Phil Walden, popular, super successful names come to the top of mind. But that list should also include Danny Goldberg, the writer of this book. He moved in that exact same world, and this new book, Bumping Into Geniuses, gives a very personal look at what that life in that world was actually like. These aren't secondhand stories. He was right in the middle of it. If you want to learn more about the business side of rock and roll, record labels, PR, contract negotiations, management companies, this book is heavy with inside stories here. But also, it's like two books in one. It combines those business stories, and it does get a little deep with intricate business terms, but it combines that with really up close and personal and business relationships he had with Led Zeppelin, Kiss, Stevie Nicks, Bruce Springsteen, Kurt Cobain and Nirvana, Bonnie Raitt, Warren Zevon, Jackson Browne. He was mixing it up with a ton of great talent, and that is why this book really works so good. It's a balance of those two sides of story, business, and then artist relation and creative. I have to mention this. This is a reissue of a book that came out in 2009, and it includes new chapters from Danny that he wrote this year. And being able to add on a perspective almost 20 years later really adds to the narrative. I enjoyed the extra updated chapters, and I think I would have missed them if I was just reading the original edition, especially since this business is gone in 2026. We're talking rock and roll history here about something that only happened during this select period of time. And now you can barely find these type of people, this type of business in the music industry. And this is not a tell-all book. It's not a mudslinger type of thing. The book is so much more personal. It's about that feeling that we all had discovering rock and roll. And Goldberg is a huge rock and roll fan. He discusses how somehow he got to ride that passion all the way to the top of Warner Brothers. And he put it with this quote, "The idea of this book is to give some views through my eyes and through the examples of a handful of artists of the rock and roll business from 1969 through 2004. I mentioned this, but I want to go a little bit deeper because it really comes across in this book, and that is how much Goldberg explains how he is a lifelong rock and roll fan, someone who found himself in the industry he loved. Even after decades at the highest levels of the record business, he still really enjoyed it. I mean, the 90s record label business was like a game of musical chairs. It was cutthroat at the executive level, and Goldberg was one of the key players, moving from seat to seat as the power structure shifted. So you get to see the ugly, the egos, and the business deals that went down in an industry that really had very few rules. But one thing that keeps coming through and keep coming back is how much admiration he still has for the artist whose paths he crossed. Love the stories of working with the artist. Really, some of the highlights of this book, he knew them and worked with them on a real personal level, especially Kurt Cobain, Stevie Nicks. The Stevie Nicks stories are tremendous, really get a great insight to her life. He tells a bunch of cool stories about her creative process and her personal life. The Warren Zevon stories, mainly about the end of his life, unfortunately, like the Cobain stories, are extremely personal and very, very insightful. One thing you do have to remember, he was the artist's manager, and he's going to protect the clients, even though those days are long gone. I mean, there are moments when Cobain or Warren Zevon don't show up as their highest selves. I know, shocking. But Goldberg is here to showcase their talents and humanize them more than really drop about them. You know, you don't get the wild rock and roll excess stories personified. You do get some, but that's really not what this is about. And speaking of Cobain, I want to throw this in there. Danny Goldberg wrote a really great book that came out in 2019 about Kurt called Serving the Servant, Remembering Kurt Cobain. And in that book, he really takes these stories that are in this book and expands on them, and expands on his relationship that he had with Kurt and Courtney. So if you want to go even deeper, and if you're a Cobain fan, a Nirvana fan, this is a cool book, Serving the Servant. Danny Goldberg is a believer in the transformative power of rock and roll. He grew up as a rock and roll fan. He saw it and he loved it as up close and personal as anyone. I want to stress that because this is a story that only he could tell. I mean, his first break came spending days on the farm in Woodstock as a rock journalist. So he was there from the early years, and he went through a lot of changes and saw a lot of different things in the music industry that he talks about in this book. The title Bumping Into Geniuses comes from a piece of advice that Goldberg once got from Atlantic Records founder Emmett Ertegun, that the way to succeed in music was simply to keep walking around until you bumped into genius. Reading this book, you get to bump into a lot of rock and roll, and I highly recommend it. A lot of geniuses are in here. It's good fun, great story. I learned a lot while enjoying the fascinating ride. I want to end it with a quote from Danny Goldberg that I really like, that I feel summed it up. I could never have gotten anywhere in the business if I have not have been a rock and roll fan first. Rock was a way for a nerd like me to connect with regular kids while still maintaining my own identity. I think a lot of us can relate to that one, and I think a lot of us are really going to like this reissue. Danny Goldberg, Bumping Into Geniuses, My Life Inside Rock and Roll, runs 321 pages. Have you heard about the new Iron Maiden documentary that's coming out? I just saw the trailer the other day. It looks tremendous. What about the long-lost Los Lobos documentary that just premiered at the South by Southwest Festival? That's finally coming out. Ann Wilson has a documentary coming out, not about Heart, just about her solo career. A lot of really cool docs are on their way. A lot of them have been announced. A lot of them premiered and disappeared, but there's still a lot of cool stuff on the horizon. If you want to get more information like this about rock and roll documentaries and rock and roll books, I encourage you to go on over and sign up for my free newsletter. It comes out once a month. I call it the Rock Talk Studio Blast. It gives you all the book buzz and doc news. It gives you a listing of every announced title that's coming out, so you can just go through and see what's coming out for the whole year. Anybody who signs up for the newsletter, again, it is free, gets entry into all the giveaways. I just gave away a really cool Kiss book that celebrated 1976. I've got a Rush book that I'm going to be giving away coming up soon. A lot of good stuff. Again, it's free. I'll leave a little link in the show notes. All you got to do is hit the link. It's a Substack newsletter, and it'll get you hooked up to the world of rock and roll books and documentaries. Speaking of that, coming up next week, I'm going to be talking about a documentary. It's got a kind of little controversy wrapped around it, which actually the documentary changed its name right before it was released. The band, I don't think, was very happy with the way it was mentioned when it first came out. Going to get into all that about the new Red Hot Chili Peppers documentary next week. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Love talking rock and roll with you, especially when I get to talk about a cool new book. There's a lot of reissues that do come out that I don't talk about here on the show. I kind of pick and choose. I really like this one. I like what was added to this book. I think it's a really good read that you're going to enjoy. All right, let's tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road. I'll see you next time in the Rock Talk studio.